Caravaggio's The Seven Works of Mercy is an oil painting that was completed in 1607. The work shows a set of compassionate acts that humans can perform for one another. These works were central to the mission statement of the confraternity the work was commissioned for. Michelangelo de Mercy has always been referred to as Caravaggio, the town he was from. Caravaggio was by all accounts an angry, temperamental man who was in constant trouble. In and out of jail, continually fighting, and questionable decisions left him with a reputation and quite a few legal complaints. His powerful patrons were able to protect him from the consequences of his actions until Ranuccio Tommasino. While Caravaggio and Tommasino had a history of disagreements, on May 29, 1606, the quarreling turned deadly. Some say it was over a woman, others a sporting match. Whatever happened, this incident couldn't be glossed over. The victim was purportedly a gangster from a powerful family who had demanded justice. Caravaggio was convicted and sentenced to beheading, an open bounty placed on his head. Caravaggio fled to Naples outside the jurisdiction of Rome. Once there, he placed himself under the protection of another powerful family, the Colonnas. It was during this period that Caravaggio painted the work we will be looking at today. As we've noted, Caravaggio's life bounced between the sacred and the profane, and while his temperament reflected the volatile, violent times that he lived in, his religious art was insightful and psychologically aware. After the beauty of the Renaissance and the elegance of the Mannerists, Caravaggio's work was forceful, technically powerful, and strikingly realistic. Filled with emotion, excitement, and contrast, Caravaggio struck a nerve in the Italy of the 1600s. People couldn't get enough. When word got out that one of his paintings would be going up, the rush of people to view the work created an excitement similar to a rock star coming to town. This is why A Criminal on the Run immediately had work and an eager audience. Caravaggio was also the most famous painter in Rome, and when word spread that he was in Naples, he quickly had commissions. The first painting he was commissioned for was The Seven Works of Mercy. This painting was for the Pio Monte della Misericordia, a confraternity or charitable organization that was founded by 7 young Neapolitan noblemen to care for the poor, and it's still in operation today. The confraternity had built a church and hired Caravaggio to paint the 7 Works of Mercy. In essence, these were their mission statement. Generally, this topic was done in 7 different paintings, and in fact, the church was built in a circular shape and had 7 areas, each built to house a painting for one of the 7 mercies. Instead, however, Caravaggio chose to include all of the mercies in one work, a monumental task. The works of mercy are based on verses from the Gospel of Matthew, which reads, "For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." So the first 6 acts are feeding the poor, giving drink to the thirsty, caring for the stranger, clothing the naked, caring for the sick, and visiting the prisoner. Medieval theologians added a 7th, burying the dead. Believing the body to be made in the image of God, and since the body serves during life as the temple of the Holy Spirit, it was important that the rites for end of life be treated as sacred, and that even the least among us be given a proper burial. Baroque artists were known for their use of chiaroscuro, or the dramatic use of light, and Caravaggio took this to a whole new level. He was a master of using light and dark to create contrast and drama, and we can see that in this work. Some believe that Caravaggio used the darkness and black backgrounds in his paintings to reflect his own doubts and the darkness in himself. His paintings were often predominantly dark, and then he added splotches of light to draw the eye to the important details. In this painting, the light could have even been a metaphor for mercy, as the acts themselves seem to illuminate the darkness. Naples is a brighter place because of the acts of mercy being performed here. The work is divided in half. The top half is the celestial or heavenly portion of the painting, with the angels, the Virgin Mary, and Christ observing what is happening down below. The lower half of the painting is the terrestrial or earthly realm. The 7 Works of Mercy is also referred to as the 7 acts of human kindness. These are the acts that we as humans do for one another as a response to receiving God's love. The top half of the painting consists of the 4 figures tumbling through the air. There are 2 angels, their wings forming an enclosure that protects and lowers a woman and her child toward the scene below. All four figures are gazing down, intent on the human's actions. The woman is the Virgin Mary and the child is Christ. They are looking with love and approval on the kindnesses being performed. The one angel's hand is stretched out toward the lower figures, a slash of light through darkness, serving to connect the two halves of the painting. His hand is in the familiar open pose that is associated with giving a blessing. John Spike, an American art historian, has said that the angel is granting grace to those below and that grace inspires the merciful acts. Mary has many titles, and one of them is the Mother of Mercy. This title and idea of Mary inspired many artists to try to capture this aspect of her character. Sometimes her cloak is pictured billowing out and extending protection to those within its fold. I have lightened the top section of this painting to see if I could find Mary's cloak, and it appears that the cloak encircles the upper figures within it, adding Mary's protection to the little group. We see that her cloak is forming a sling that seems to be cradling the angel on the right, and a portion of it falls down below the outstretched hand, emphasizing it. If we follow the idea that the angel, through his arm, is transmitting a blessing of grace to humanity, represented by the figures below, it follows that Mary's cloak is serving a similar purpose, transmitting her mercy and allowing that mercy to connect the upper and lower sections of the painting. Another section of her cloak is visible on the top left. Here we are seeing the lining of the cloak as a swath of white fabric swirling in the air. It's been suggested that this ghostly-looking section of cloak denotes the Holy Spirit, who inspires the acts of mercy that are being performed below. So the top of the painting is the source of the acts of human kindness below. Near the center of the painting, we see a man holding a light. He is dressed in white and wearing a black hat. He's a priest. In front of him is a man in a dark-colored shirt who is obviously holding something heavy. If we look lower, we will see feet, indicating a dead body. This man is a gravedigger, and he and the priest are performing one of the 7 acts of kindness, burying the dead. Unlike the other acts of human mercy, burying the dead is not mentioned in Matthew and was added later. Instead, the source for this act is the book of Tobit. Tobit is a book that is included in the canon of both the Catholic and Orthodox churches. The book tells the story of Tobit, a devout Jew living in exile in Nineveh under the reign of Sargon II. One of the pious acts Tobit is especially known for is burying Israelites that Sargon's successor has slain. Leaving the dead unburied was a way to show disrespect and condemnation. Tobit's burying the dead was an act of defiance, and had the king seizing his property and exiling him from Nineveh. According to the book of Tobit, burying the dead is an important work of charity. Now in this painting, one of the more noticeable figures is the nearly naked man on the ground in the forefront of the painting. Above him is what appears to be a young nobleman with a feathered cap. The young man is Saint Martin, who has just cut his cloak in two so that he can share it with the man on the ground. We can see his sword as a slash of white above the beggar's shoulder. He's just used the sword to slice the fabric. The legend of St. Martin is based on the story of a Roman soldier stationed in Gaul. As he was approaching the city gates, he saw a beggar, and his heart was moved by the man. Impulsively, he removed his military cloak, drew his sword, and cut the cloak in two. He then wrapped the man in the warm fabric and went on his way. That night, Martin had a dream. In the dream, he saw Jesus wearing his cloak and telling the angels about the man who had shared it. The story is a reenactment of the verse in Matthew that when we saw Christ naked, we clothed him. Confraternities like the one that commissioned this work believed that in caring for the poor, they were caring for Christ himself. Some even believed that Christ might disguise himself as a beggar or pilgrim, and that we, unaware, actually feed and clothe Jesus or an angel. Hebrews 13:2 says, "Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it." Some versions of the story of St. Martin go on to state that when Martin awoke after seeing his vision, he saw that his cloak had been made whole. Eventually, the supposed cloak of St. Martin would become a holy relic. To the left of St. Martin, we find a bearded man with a scallop shell on his hat. The scallop shell, as a mark of the pilgrim, is connected to the story of St. James the Great, Christ's disciple. The tradition goes that after Christ ascended back to heaven, James set out for Hispania to spread the gospel, and he had many converts. After 2 years, he returned to Jerusalem, where King Herod Agrippa ordered him to be beheaded, and so the saint was martyred in 44 CE in Jerusalem. The king refused to allow burial of the body as a final insult, and so a couple disciples from Hispania, that would be Spain, recovered the body and took it back to Spain, where he was buried and a mausoleum built. On the return boat trip, a horse and rider fell from the boat into the sea. Instead of drowning, they were miraculously saved and came up out of the water covered in scallop shells. Scallop shells are found along the coast where St. James Mausoleum was erected. Over time, Muslims took control of Spain and the site was lost. In the 9th century, a miracle occurred and the mausoleum was rediscovered. And when Christians managed to regain control of Spain, they declared St. James their patron saint. The Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela was built at the burial site. Priests often gave a pilgrimage during this time as a penance for sins, and the pilgrim was required to return with an item that proved that they had arrived at the pilgrimage site before the forgiveness would be granted. Over time, the scallop shell became the token that pilgrims journeying to Santiago would take back home. Locals quickly realized that they could monetize the scallop shells, and they began collecting them and selling them at the cathedral, so that pilgrims didn't have to continue their journey down to the seaside. Eventually, the scallop shell became the symbol for all pilgrims. The lines of the shells were said to represent the many paths a pilgrim could take to get to God. Today, scallop shells are mile markers, showing travelers that they're on the right path to get to the cathedral. Additionally, scallop shells are often found on baptismal fonts and to scoop the water over the head of the person being baptized. This is to mark the beginning of the individual's pilgrimage through life toward heaven. Now, the man directly in front of the pilgrim is an innkeeper who is indicating with his finger pointing off of the canvas that he has room and he will shelter the pilgrim. In between the pilgrim and the innkeeper, we see this wild bearded man drinking from a bone, the water splashing onto his face. This is Samson. Samson, famous for trusting Delilah with the secret that his great strength was due to his uncut hair. However, this image of Samson references a different story. Samson was fighting the Philistines in Judges 15 and grabbing the jawbone of a donkey slew 1,000 men. After this, he cast the jawbone aside and was exceedingly thirsty. You think? He cried out to the Lord in his thirst, and God opened up the jawbone, and water came out, and Samson drank and was revived. Besides water coming from a donkey's jawbone, the inclusion of this story has confused many trying to interpret the painting. Caravaggio was supposed to be painting 7 mercies or kindnesses performed by humans. In Samson's case, God is the one who performed the kindness and provided the drink. I have no explanation for what he was thinking. The next portion of the canvas that we're going to examine is the hardest to see. This is likely due to the darkening of the canvas over time. I've lightened this part of the painting up considerably. And if you look down the arm of the beggar in front of the painting next to his arm, you will see a foot. And you can see that there's another man lying in this section. This is the sick man, perhaps crippled given the angle of his foot. His face is just below St. Martin's sword. Here we have the pilgrim playing a double role. Standing over the sick man, we can see that the pilgrim has been painted as Christ, and Jesus is actually healing the crippled man at his feet. Our next 2 acts of mercy are combined into one image. The woman breastfeeding the man who is imprisoned. While we might find this strange and disturbing, the story was a familiar one, and one that appeared in art from time to time. While this is a striking image no matter the era, we need to realize that breastfeeding was viewed differently during these times than it is by many people today. Nursing was the only way to feed an infant. There were no stores full of formula. Mothers nursed, and if for some reason they couldn't, they had to get another woman in the village who would be called in to help, or a wet nurse. We have paintings of the Madonna nursing Christ, which gives an indication of just how normal and non-sexual an activity breastfeeding was. However, the image of nursing an elderly man was still shocking, but perhaps not as laden with sexual imagery as our modern eye would give it. This image is based on a story from ancient Rome recorded in the 9 books of memorable acts and sayings of the ancient Romans. The story was one of the great acts of filial piety and earned Pero, the woman in the story, great honor. As the story goes, Simon was her father, and he was incarcerated and sentenced to death by starvation. Every day when his daughter would come to visit him, she would secretly nurse him to keep him alive. And so, in this image, Pero is both visiting the prisoner and feeding the hungry. Caravaggio was not known for either his kindness or his mercy, and yet he has produced this tender work promoting these virtues. As the year 2020 has drawn to a close, I can't help but consider the amazing acts of mercy we have witnessed from around the world as the COVID pandemic spread. It's been a hard year, but as Mr. Rogers taught us, we should look for the helpers. And throughout the pandemic, there have been tens of thousands of those that are selflessly caring for the sick. So let's head into the new year thinking about how we can incorporate the 7 acts of mercy into this year so that 2021 can be a better one.
Thanks for watching. Make sure to like this video by giving us a thumbs up below, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss great commentary on classic works of art. KellyBagdanoff.com is your source for great content and curriculum, as well as devotional materials using the medium of art. Make sure you visit and subscribe. Pablo Picasso said, "Art washes from the soul the dust of everyday life." So take a moment to share this video because art is too important not to share.
See you later, alligator.